Teeth and a nickel tip. Turning 12 was a big deal, and maybe I'm not really sure why. It might have only been because it was a year shy of 13 when the Jewish kids in the neighborhood became men at their bar mitzvahs, and the rest of us looked a little more closely in the mirror, waiting for something to happen. At 12, we were never convinced it would. For me, it meant something else as well. I was officially old enough to get a paper route. As it turned out, the kid who did it in our little piece of suburbia was moving on to a real job, washing dishes somewhere or stocking shelves at Bohack. I wasted no time getting over to the distributor's house and applied for the job. Here was a guy who was a perfect role model, someone who never quite got past the paper route stage, someone I wanted to not grow up to be. There was really no training to speak of, and I signed my creaky signature in a couple of places, and shazam, I was a paper boy. It was big money, all right, and the kid on the block with the route always seemed to have plenty of ready money for Yoo-hoo and Twinkies and the biggest collection of baseball cards. Some of them even got Schwinn Stingray bikes that made the rest of us drool with envy. A few years before, my folks had decided to teach me the value of a buck by giving me an allowance of 75 cents in exchange for a few chores, which I never seemed to accomplish in a timely or adequate fashion. It also gave them some leverage for blackmail by taking it away at a whim for various infractions of propriety. It hardly got me anywhere, but got them a lot of apparent latitude over my life. It was hardly worth it. Having a paper route opened a big door for me on the road to independence, and I went through that door dancing. At the distributor's house, the garage door was flung open, and the garage was just teeming with newspapers and bustling with determined little entrepreneurs who grabbed their perfectly counted piles and stuffed them into their sacks. The distributor handed me a brand-new canvas bag with Newsday written across the face, which had an ingenious strap that could be slung over the shoulder or mounted on the handlebars of a bike. Most of the other kids, the real veterans, had bags which had become black with newsprint, and often the corners were frayed. It was a badge of honor to have a nasty-looking paper bag. I put the thing on my bike for the first time and loaded up my 35 papers, plus one. They always gave us an extra copy they called a carrier's copy, not for us to read so much as being able to get a new customer started right away should they call the house or stop you as you made your rounds. So now I felt like a company man, the blue emblem of our great Long Island newspaper Newsday emblazoned on my bag, and my own copy of the paper, which I'm proud to add, I often read. The deal was this. The paper was a nickel a day, and there was not yet a Sunday paper. I paid 22 cents for the 6 papers for the week, kept 8 for myself, and hoped for tips. Back in 1969, a nickel was a nickel, and it actually could get you something like a candy bar or a pack of baseball cards with a stick of bubble gum in it. For all intents and purposes, a good tip was a dime a week. Many paid with a quarter and a dime, which left a nickel tip. Those people always said, "You can keep the change," like they had handed you the keys to their car, and I was grateful, although now I'm not so sure why. Some people who must have been millionaires gave me 50 cents. That was big. After a while, you started to know what to expect from each of the neighbors. If they had some dislike for your parents, or if you had broken one of their azaleas running for a fly ball in a stickball game, you were screwed. In the old movies, you see the paperboy flinging the newspaper toward the front stoop. Some guy in slippers and a robe would emerge and yawn and grab the paper, having a look at the front page before he turned to go back into the house. Newsday did not believe in flinging. So I had to park the bike and balance it on the kickstand just so, or the weight of it and the papers would cause the bike to tumble and the papers to fall out. Then I'd head up the walk and place the paper in the mailbox beside the front door. Some people had dogs which barked wildly the minute you parked the bike, and I was sure one of them was going to rip my head off. Some stayed out in the fenced-in yard, and I would jiggle the gate to see if they were in the yard. Dogs don't like mailmen, but they want to eat paper boys for lunch, starting with the legs and working their way up. The owners always said, "Don't worry, he doesn't bite." It was only because of wits and reflexes that I was only bitten 3 times. To this day, I still hate dogs. There's not one thing about a dog which appeals to me. To me, hell might be having to spend eternity listening to barking. And then there was the rain and the snow and the freezing cold. But there were also the hot days when I wished I had never thought of being the wealthiest kid on the block, and wished some more that I were down at Jones Beach with my mother and siblings, swimming and picking sand for my bologna sandwich. And for their nickel-a-day plus tip, my customers were very demanding. They wanted their paper dry and clean, and they wanted it on time. If they did not get it that way, they would call our house to complain. My father, never any help, might say that he understood perfectly, that he had paid me allowance for years for nothing and looked out the kitchen window at our uncut lawn. They might even call the distributor, and he was not very patient about those matters. He always had a line of kids like me waiting their chance to kick me to the curb. It seemed at times like a lot of work and a lot of responsibility, but I didn't mind all that much except for the miserable dogs. Did I remember to say how much I hated those dogs? What a dopey idea to take a wild carnivorous beast and keep it in your living room and expect it to behave. Still, I always liked the money. On a good week I could make $6. Boy, what you could do with $6 in those days. I survived as a paperboy for about 2 years and finally got that new bike, a 10-speed racer which I used to ride up to Bethpage Park to caddy. I left home at 4 in the morning and rode for 45 minutes, then waited 5 hours for a loop, a chance to lug a big old leather bag around a golf course for another 5 hours. The thing weighed about half as much as I did for sure. Then I rode back home again. A 12-hour day, $5 for the work, $1 tip if you managed to not lose any golf balls. That was big money. It had only been a few weeks when someone swiped my new bike while I was out on the golf course. I ended the day and my caddying career being driven home by a sympathetic New York State trooper. As I stepped out of the car in front of my house, I could imagine the chatter of the neighbors. They finally nabbed that Moran kid. Do you know how many times I didn't get my paper on time? He yelled at my dog, too. His father tells me he never remembers to take out the trash on Wednesdays either. Serves him right. I retired briefly at age 14 and then went to work for Mr. Solovev, the landscaper over in Amityville. I worked 25 hours a week and came home completely black with dust and sweat. Learned what the term withholding tax meant and took home about $30 a week. The statement I got from Social Security when I turned 58 last spring reflected every handful of money I had paid from those early pay stubs. After that, I had several jobs, mainly in restaurants and mainly for about $2 an hour. Somewhere among all those late nights and tanks of soapy water and asking people politely, "Can I take this plate for you?" I decided I should go to college and become a dentist. And I did.